Hello everyone, welcome back to the Pikmin 3 commentary. In this part, we begin the final area of the game, the Formidable Oak. This area is very different from the final areas of Pikmin 1 and 2. And it's interesting.
Ooh, that ellipses before interesting.
Well,
Yeah.
Makes me think it's
in this
anything.
genre, you have to get creative if you want your final area to stand out as a final area rather than just another area that happens to be at the end of the game. So,
It's it's hard to do final areas in strategy games. One of my favorite ones is Fire Emblem Awakening. Like, its final boss, you have to kind of come up with a reason for why there are other units in it, because in a game like Fire Emblem, if it was just a final boss in the most traditional sense, it would be your army versus one guy, and that's not an interesting strategy.
in say Shining Force 1, for example, Dark Dragon is this giant-ass three-headed dragon, so they just made the three heads individual targets to attack, so that you had these three big stationary targets to go after. But of course, they massively beat down anything that gets within their range, so you have to be careful about how you approach. And that's one way to do it.
Yeah. So the first game had a much more traditional final area, in that, like, there's a couple of puzzles you have to solve using each of the Pikmin's elements, and
then there's just a big enemy you have to beat up.
Yeah, so it's about as basic of a final area as you can get, but effective. Pikmin 2, there's not really a final boss, because you can theoretically find Louis first and then do everything out of order. But saving Louis is intended to be the final boss of that game. And the dungeon is just kind of the same as all the other dungeons, but harder. And then there's a really hard final boss at the end of that.
So, what on earth is this thing?
You remember the water wraith from last game?
But now it's gold! This thing just really likes Olimar for some reason, and he doesn't want you to have him. So, the idea of this is, like, it's a obstacle course, effectively, where you have to solve a bunch of Pikmin puzzles, and
The Pikmin remember him.
yeah, so they're trying to carry him, but they don't know where to go. So Brittany specifically is who they will follow. So you have to lead Brittany around the area, because once you get into the actual area itself, the Plasma Wraith starts following you. So you have to solve all these puzzles in order to build bridges and whatnot to get Olimar out. But at the same time, the Plasma Wraith is following you. So it's this kind of like hybrid escape puzzle challenge sort of area. It's easily the most linear part of the game, because
It's also one of those, what you're going to wind up doing, if you have any sense, is just let Olimar get captured, solve everything on your own time, and then go get him.
Yeah, so you can't just let him get captured, because if the Plasma Wraith gets too far away, the day immediately ends. So you can't just, like, let Olimar, like, sit with the Plasma Wraith the entire time. There are some workarounds, though. Like, there are some areas you can hide Brittany and Olimar where they can't get caught. So whenever you find one of those, you just kind of leave her there until you solve all the problems.
It's interesting that they decide specifically to follow Brittany.
Yeah.
Well, it's just because she decided to do so.
Yeah.
Oh, does she?
I mean, it is an interesting choice to have her be the one to do it. I guess, like, they could have picked any of them, so I wonder why they picked Brittany, I guess. Maybe because they wanted Alf and Charlie to be... I'm not sure. It might have something to do with the character order, because when you switch through characters using the minus button, you always go Alf, Brittany, Charlie in that order. I believe you can also switch by tapping the gamepad, and if you do that, you go to whichever ones you want, but I've never once in my life switched characters by using the gamepad, so... Yeah, it might be, we thought that Brittany was the best one to do because of that order for some reason. I couldn't tell you. She also doesn't get much of a head start. I recommend having Wing Pikmin carry Olimar almost all of the time, because it makes it a lot easier to cheese a lot of these things. The only thing is that he's
You would
a lot
think with Wing
slower.
Pikmin you could just tell him to, like, fly out of the stump and carry him back.
He's pretty. Olimar's pretty chunky though.
He has enough flying Pikmin to do so.
Yeah, they can only fit 10. All right, it won't work. There is also all the enemies like turn into the gold stuff, so it's kind of implied that they are also the Plasm Wraith, sort of, which is interesting. So yeah, I like this area in concept because it makes the final boss a level. And I think that, for me specifically, I like having a final level feel satisfying, you know, and interesting. Because, I'm trying to think. Let's say a game like Mega Man 2, just as an example. The final level, or, like, the last 2 levels in that game really aren't that interesting. It's just like a boss rush, and then you walk through a corridor with some drippy things, you know? And it's more about the final boss and the boss rush itself in that sort of instance. For me, personally, that doesn't resonate all that much with me, because the final challenge is what I will tend to remember more than the final boss, unless the final boss is, like, excellent. So in this case, since the combat in Pikmin is never really super complex, I like the idea of making it about the final challenge. The problem with the execution is just that it's so long. This area usually takes me at least 2 days to finish. Often, on my first try, it took me like 3 or 4. And then the final boss after is also a pain in the ass. So it just overstays its welcome a little bit, I think, is the main problem.
I think part of the reason that is the case is because they wanted the final challenge to be quite difficult to do within a single day.
Yeah, that is definitely the case, because there is a checkpoint. Not a checkpoint, but you can blow up a wall and it's a shortcut to the second half of the area, effectively. So it functions as a checkpoint. And, I mean, that's a good idea in theory, but also it doesn't really... The time limit in this sense doesn't make a lot of sense, because they just, after the time comes out, even if they have Olimar, like, and he's still safe, they just decide to leave when you run out of time. I mean, I guess, you know, there could be more predators or whatever, but I think this is one of those instances where I think that it would be better if they didn't have the time limit at all, like if the day time limit just didn't apply to this area. Because honestly, this does also feel a lot more like one of the dungeons from Pikmin 2, now that I'm thinking about it. Those were fairly linear, or at least they felt fairly linear. They had some branching areas.
What it kind of reminds me of in execution is completing a dungeon in Persona, where you have
What, you mean like Tartarus or something?
not necessarily, not Tartarus. That's more like the Persona 4 and 5 dungeons, where you have a big old gauntlet of challenges to get through, and like, if you want to be super efficient, you're aiming to get it done in one day. But if you're not good at the game and don't have a bunch of excess resources, you're probably not going to do that.
Yeah.
So you wind up having to try and at least make it as far as some milestone that will let you pick up quickly from the middle of the dungeon the next time you go in.
Yeah, so I'm not super familiar with either Persona 4 or 5, but there's no, once you're in the dungeon for the night, there's no, like, hard time limit there. Like,
well, not so much a time limit, no. It's what winds up limiting you is your SP, which is really goddamn hard to restore.
Yeah.
So you wind up just having to go as far as you can until your SP is down. And then maybe you try to push a little bit harder on nothing but physical attack skills, but that's really difficult to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the vibe I got. So effectively, it's like, in an older styled RPG, it's like the point where you would leave the dungeon, go to an inn, and come back is effectively like your time limit. And
yeah.
It's like, okay, you can leave to go heal 10 times before you fail, effectively.
Yeah.
Which, from what I can tell, usually isn't that bad if you take your time in a Persona game.
If you're being competent in a Persona game, you'll probably only need 2 trips into the dungeon to get to the boss, and well, in 5 this is mandatory, but in 4 it's kind of optional. Usually you're gonna want to just save the boss for its own day.
Yeah. And that's almost always what happens here, too. It usually takes me 2 full days to get through the final area in Pikmin and 3, and then another day on top of that to fight the boss. One thing I do really like about this game is that if you fight the boss and you get a quarter of its health down, and the boss doesn't die, when you start up the next day, the boss's health is saved. So you don't have to fight a quarter of the boss fight again, which I really appreciate in this game, because in Pikmin, that's just something I really like about Pikmin in general, is that they are really good about, like, the game remembers a lot of things. So if you kill an enemy in an area, the enemy stays dead for, I think it's like 3 or 4 days before it respawns. And the idea is, oh, after some time a new member of the species moved in, effectively. But you don't have to, if you kill an enemy, you don't have to worry too much about it showing up there. And also, if a fruit is only delivered halfway to the ship, it will be in that same exact spot when you start there the next day, which I also really like. So the sense of continuity is really good. The difference between, back on topic though, the difference between the Persona example you gave me and in Pikmin 3 is that you're limited, the resource that you're limited by is time.
Well,
in this,
it kind of was in Persona 3, but it was really annoying in that case.
Yeah, because you got like sick if you stayed in the thing too.
Yeah, well, the more your characters fought, the more they'd get tired, and if you ever went down to the first floor of Tartarus with a tired party member, they would automatically leave for the night. You had no say in it. They would just go back to the dorm. So eventually you'd be down to just your protagonist, which is not a safe way to explore at all. You could, theoretically, explore forever as a tired and zonked out protagonist, just stumbling his way through the dungeon until the cows come home, but you'd probably die if you tried.
I wonder if somebody's actually done that, used an emulator and save stated until they got to the end of Tartarus with just the protagonist.
Well, you also had barricades that could only be removed by defeating the full moon bosses, but...
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. I haven't played... I played Persona 3 on PSP, oh god, what was it?
Oh, you played the portable version? Yeah.
Yeah, 2012? So that's 8 years.
Yeah, I remember.
Now.
I remember you didn't... I remember your main complaint with it was the lack of main boss dungeons, which, yeah, is pretty much what they fixed in 4.
Yeah, there's also a couple of other things too, like the pacing is just not really my style, where it's half of a visual novel and half an RPG.
Yeah, well, to be fair, the pacing in Persona 3 is probably the worst aspect of that game.
Yeah. So, and also just I feel like this applies to this is a Persona 5 sort of thing. So, and I know I'm the only person on the planet who holds this opinion. I don't like the visual style of Persona 5 at all. Like the menus and whatnot. Again, I'm the only person on the planet who thinks that way.
I think you might be.
I don't know. It bothers me. I just don't like it. It's fine if you like it.
It might grow on you if you played the game, because it really does fit with the overall tone and feel of the story.
Yeah,
but
it's just not something that interests me, which is fine. Not every game is for every person. So, that's basically where I stand on that. But in this case, though, I think that it's just really jarring in this game to have to stop when you run out of time in this instance, because this challenge functions effectively so much like it feels so much like a Pikmin 2 dungeon, but I talked a little bit earlier about how I really like how they made the Pikmin 2 dungeons into the mission mode. I really liked how they did that in this game. I think that if they were to make them into the single player, I would like them to be like this, but maybe with not necessarily a time limit, but
that bastard can just climb straight up a wall.
Yeah. If he ever finds Olimar, you have to
beat him up enough.
Yeah, and the boss, when he does catch Olimar and you beat him up, he does stay put for a while, I guess I technically lied when I said there was no regenerating enemies. This guy will regenerate health afterwards, and then once he regenerates, he goes back to chasing you. But it's supposed to give you, like, a breather period so that you can get back to what you were doing and not immediately have to chase
Deal
him.
with them.
Yeah. But what was I saying? Yeah, if they were to make a Pikmin 2 dungeon again, I would like it if they took this kind of level structure where it's like, okay, it's more, instead of about exploration, it's about, okay, solve these specific challenges. The random aspect and the poor design of let's just have stuff fall from the ceiling is my main issue with the Pikmin 2 dungeons. But I think that if you were to do that, just having a time limit or just having something chasing you, like the Plasm Wraith or Water Wraith, is what you should have. You shouldn't have both. Because the stress of the thing chasing you is enough. You don't also need a time limit where suddenly you just have to stop what you're doing and then restart a good amount of that progress.
It does feel like they could have, for this one challenge, just dropped the day-night time cycle completely.
Yeah, I mean, they do that. In the first, you can turn the day-night cycle off, because in the first day, there's never a time limit in Pikmin. So there certainly is the option for them to turn the day thing off, and it could be like just while you're inside the tree. There's no day-night. And, you know, like you said in Persona where, if you need more SP or you run out of SP, you leave and then can try again.
That is a thought.
And the same sort of thing, if you run out of Pikmin because they all die, you can then leave and start over with a new batch, you know?
That is a thought. In, let's say, Harvest Moon Animal Parade, which was my first Harvest Moon game. Yeah, you do have the day-night cycle going on, but the clock always freezes when you're indoors. So you do have those times when you don't have to worry about the time pressure.
Yeah. The only Harvest Moon-like game I've ever played is Stardew Valley. Which I liked. I liked that game a lot. I haven't gone back to it. What I really liked about it, though, is that the day-night cycle allows you to kind of make your own goals effectively, and it's more about, what do I want to do within this specific day? And it's more about, actually, the first thought that comes to mind is Majora's Mask, where you have to prioritize, who do I want to spend time with today? Because I can't spend time with everyone every day, you know?
Yeah. You're, like, most of the time you're always going to want to try to at least talk to everyone once just to get their bonding points up, but,
Yeah.
a lot of the time you won't really be able to do everything that you would have liked to do on that given day.
Yeah. I should go back and try Stardew Valley again, because that game was really good, and they've apparently updated it a fair bit since
I've seen people do some interesting things with their farms in that game. Like, I've seen setups that are literally wineries. Like, just completely forget about having a regular ass farmer ranch. No, we're gonna have a vineyard. It's gonna be wine all day, every day.
Yeah, which, I mean, it makes sense, because then you can specialize in that thing and really, really, maximize your time and upgrades to whatnot. Just like, I don't have to spend money. Wait, why are the two I whistled those two Pikmin, and now they're being eaten anyway. I don't get that. Okay. But yeah, I have seen a lot of things where it's just like, okay, we're gonna just do cabbages, or just do, I think, like, you could make maple syrup in that game, too, or whatever. There's a lot of...
There was a cooking system, yeah. Like, the only downside to that is you don't want to do it until you don't want to specialize until after you've completed the main plot, because the stupid spirit things need all sorts of different crops.
Oh yeah, I remember that. It's like you have to grow at least one of all of these things and get... Yeah, there's a lot of different things about that.
Yeah,
sometimes Stardew Valley was a good game.
Sometimes they need a specific quality of crop, and...
Yeah. Hey, everyone, you should be friends with Shane. Make sure to become best friends with Shane, everybody.
Okay.
You see, I haven't played that game, so I don't get that.
So Shane is the douchebag kind of character at the start who doesn't is like, why are you talking to me? And then when you when you become friends with him, you learn his backstory, and it's you get a couple of events with him that are really, really, really depressing. But it's also like a really, really good character arc. So you actually, I said it kind of as a joke, but you actually should become friends with Shane. It's a really good scene. In
Yeah.
any case, next time we beat the game, so we hope to see you all there. Maybe we will talk about the ending. Probably not.